guys, we're back again.
Hey guys.
Hello. Today we're going to read to you about Ulysses S. Grant. Now, earlier we read about Robert E. Lee, and he was the commander of the Confederate Army. He was from the state of Virginia, and originally he didn't want to fight against his state, so that's why he decided to join the Confederate Army. His soldiers loved and respected him. Today you're going to find out about a new general, and Miss Latham's going to start.
Hey guys, as you are listening today, I want you to be thinking of ways that Ulysses S. Grant, what kind of general was he, what kind of commander was he, and how is he like General Lee, and how is he different? I'm going to check with my co-workers real quick. Is it Ulysses or Ulysses?
I've always said Ulysses, but I don't think it matters.
Okay, we might use that a little interchangeably. Here we go. The date was May 4th, 1864. The day before, marching with a strength of over 118,000 soldiers, the Army of the Potomac crossed the Rapidan River in the middle of Virginia. The Blue Ridge Mountains lay to the west. To the east lay miles of dark forest and the Confederate Army under command of Robert E. Lee. General Lee had roughly 60,000 men under his command, half as many as the Union Army, but they were ready to put up a strong fight. The Union Army was commanded by Ulysses S. Grant. He was no stranger to battle. He had served in the Army for over 25 years, starting when he was just 17 years old. That was just like Robert E. Lee. The Civil War was not his first war either. Like the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, General Grant had fought in another war. General Ulysses S. Grant leaned against the post outside his tent. See if you can find him in the picture. He wearily watched as a long line of supply wagons carrying ammunition, food, and medical supplies rumbled past. These supply wagons made up the rear or backside of the army. The main body of the army, the soldiers who needed all those supplies in order to fight, were miles ahead, deep in the forest, looking for the enemy. General Grant was now the general-in-chief of the entire Union Army. The only person who ranked higher than General Grant was President Lincoln. Grant took his orders from Lincoln, and everyone else took their orders from Grant.
Every general in the war faced hard choices and had heavy responsibilities with the lives of thousands of soldiers in his hand. But in 1864, no general had more worries than General Grant. General Grant had spent the first 3 years of the Civil War fighting farther west, away from the action in Virginia. His most impressive victory in the early years of the war came at Vicksburg, a city in Mississippi. The same day that the Union Army had won the Battle of Gettysburg, General Grant won the Battle of Vicksburg after 2 long, hard months. The victory gave the Union final control over the entire Mississippi River, which in turn would make it easier for the Union to take over the rest of the South. The Mississippi River was important because the Union could use it to send troops and supplies from the north to the south. It was easier to use a river to do this because there were no cars or trucks yet, and so there were no highways like we have today.
To win the Civil War, the Union needed to take control of the South, including all of its cities and roads. Nobody in the North expected this to be so difficult. The Union had more than 1 million men in uniform. By the end of the Civil War, 1 out of every 10 Union soldiers was African American, and 1 of 4 Union sailors was African American. Factories in the North had been working day and night for years, producing weapons, uniforms, blankets, food rations, and all of the other things the Army needed. The Yankees, as Union soldiers were nicknamed, had everything they needed to fight and win the war. The Confederates, or rebels as they were often called, did not have as many men as the Union. The South did not have many factories. Many of those it did have early in the war had been destroyed or captured by 1864. Confederate soldiers marched to battle without shoes, without enough food, and sometimes without enough ammunition. I hope you remember ammunition is what they put in their guns and cannons. Yet even though they were exhausted and starved, the Confederates somehow held on and managed to keep fighting.
Grant was not the general-in-chief of the Union Army at the beginning of the Civil War. Throughout the war, President Lincoln had trouble with some of his Union generals. It wasn't that they were bad generals. They could win battles and capture enemy forts and towns, but they made mistakes as well. They often waited too long to attack or failed to chase the Confederates when they were on the run. Basically, President Lincoln felt the Union generals were never aggressive or forceful enough. But Grant was different. General Grant had won the long Battle of Vicksburg because he was stubborn and unafraid. He kept fighting and attacking until the enemy surrendered or gave up. President Lincoln put General Grant in charge of the entire Union Army because General Grant promised that he would do whatever it took to win. He would chase General Robert E. Lee and his army all over Virginia, and he would not stop until the war was finished. This outlook earned him the nickname Unconditional Surrenderer because he would accept nothing less from the Confederate Army than a complete surrender.
General Grant removed a folded letter from his breast pocket. President Lincoln had sent this letter a few days earlier. It did not contain any vital or necessary information or new orders. It was just a simple letter sent to wish him good luck in battle. Grant reread the letter, written in the president's own handwriting. Lieutenant General Grant, not expecting to see you again before you march into Virginia. I wish to tell you that I am entirely satisfied, or I am entirely happy, with what you have done up to this time. You are alert and self-reliant. And pleased with this, I do not wish to control your actions in any way. If there is anything wanting which is within my power to give, do not fail to let me know it. And now with a brave army and a just cause, a worthy cause, may God sustain you or keep you strong. Yours very truly, Abraham Lincoln.
The next day, May 5th, in the forests near Fredericksburg, Virginia, the main body of Grant's army clashed with General Lee's army in one of the wildest battles of the war. In those days, armies always preferred to fight in open fields, where it was easier to move cannons and large groups of men, and easier for generals to see what was happening. This time, though, the armies met deep in the woods, where the tree and plant growth was so heavy that the soldiers could barely see one another. This was called the Battle of the Wilderness, and it was the very first time General Grant and Lee faced each other in battle. It was a very chaotic battle. Thousands were killed and wounded. At the end of the day, both armies limped away with no clear winner in the battle.
After the battle, many of the Union wounded were taken to churches and homes in the nearby city of Fredericksburg. Clara Barton was there in one of those churches tending to the wounded soldiers. Hopefully you remember her and her nickname. The next day, hundreds more wounded soldiers were brought in from yet another battle, and on it went. The armies of Grant and Lee met again and again during the months that followed. Sometimes Grant won the battle, sometimes Lee won, and sometimes nobody won. But with each battle, the Confederate army got a little smaller and much closer to final defeat.
All right, guys, that's the end of our read aloud for today. Just like yesterday, we're going to ask you some questions about the story. You can record your answers in your journal, making sure you use complete sentences, or if you have an adult nearby, you can just tell them the answers, but make sure you are using complete sentences there too. All right, question number 1. Can we scroll?
Yes.
To the first image.
There we
go. Who is pictured in this image? What important job did Ulysses S. Grant have during the Civil War?
Question 2. Why did President Lincoln ask him to take over the command of the Union Army?
Question 3. Why was Grant given the nickname Unconditional Surrenderer?
Number 4. In the read aloud, you heard that General Grant won the Battle of Vicksburg because he was stubborn and unafraid. How might being stubborn and unafraid help someone win a battle in a war?
Question 5. What nickname was given to Union soldiers? What nickname was given to the Confederate soldiers?
Alrighty, and for this next part, you're going to make a T-chart in your journal. Remember, that's just where you draw one line across and then separate them so you have two parts. On one side, you are going to write about the Confederate Army, and on the other side, you're going to write about the Union Army. I want you to think of some things that you heard in the story. If you need to rewind and go back, list the things that you heard about each army. You're going to use your chart to answer the next question.
And that next question, after finishing your T-chart, do you think these unequal circumstances eventually led to the defeat of the Confederate Army? So you're thinking about the difference, what things the Union Army had, what things the Confederate Army had. Do you think that helped lead to the defeat of the Confederate Army?
All right, today you also have a Civil War journal entry, and this is one that you're going to upload to your portfolio. So make sure you remember all of the important things about sentences and you use really nice handwriting. Today you're going to think about General Grant, and you're going to tell us what kind of person General Grant was. What traits did he have that made him a good general? You're going to write a few sentences describing these things, and then you can draw a picture of him if you would like. Make sure you take a clear picture and put it on your portfolio. We can't wait to see him.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
All right.